But yes, we are 5 minutes in, fast, so I think we can get started. Thank you all for joining. It's much appreciated. We're really excited for Jumpstart to be hosting our first webinar of the year. Whoop, whoop. It looks like people are really keen to kind of know about startup careers, and I guess like it's really telling, right? Because it's this like alternative route to corporate as well. So it seems like people are really interested. So thank you all for joining. And we're grateful to Jumpstart for partnering up with us to bring these opportunities to you guys. This session, Eddie is going to be basically running through CV and interview prep to kind of help people just navigate the world of startups and how to kind of get onto the Jumpstart program. And I think it's important to say as well that these tips are generally for anyone who's trying to navigate the job market as well. So I very much think it would be helpful to everyone. So don't just only look at it from like a startup lens. And again, I will say, if you can kind of go on mute as well, let's just have some meeting etiquette. And yeah, let's just all keep on engaging in the chat and throwing questions in there. And I'll kind of insert them in the conversation as the presentation progresses as well as it seems appropriate. And then the last thing I would say as well, guys, is that, don't be afraid to share on socials that you're tuned into the webinar as well. Sorry, could we all just go on mute, please? I think I can see a couple of people's mics still on, please. If we can just all go on mute, that would be much appreciated.
Doing it. Diane, that's the question. What you're doing? I will. Wait, I will.
Right. No,
Don't walk away. Okay.
perfect. And yeah, lastly, I was just gonna say, guys, don't be afraid to kind of share this on socials as well. And just share the good word about this webinar, share it on LinkedIn, share it on Instagram, so that other people as well can kind of benefit from these sessions if we host them in the future as well. But with that being said, I'll pass it over to Eddie to get started.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so it was so great to see. Oh, I'm getting someone's mic still on. I'm getting a bit of back there. I can try again speaking now. Yeah, okay, great. Well, yeah, that's better now. So thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to Beyond Education for organising this. It was so great to see so much engagement with our last Introduction to Startups webinar last year. And so yeah, we thought it'd be really worth doing an Applications to Startups webinar this year, going through all of our top tips, sort of like, now you're interested in startups, how do you apply, how do you prepare your CVs, how do you interview for them? Because they're often a little bit different to sort of interviewing and applying to like bigger corporate companies and like things like that. So yeah, first of all, I am Ellie. I am the Access and Marketing Lead at Jumpstart. What this means is I run all of the marketing initiatives for Jumpstart, but I also run all of our access initiatives. A big part of Jumpstart's goal for this year, but also just more generally, is trying to make startup careers as accessible to as many people as possible. And so that involves spreading the word and also hosting webinars like this. And so yeah, that's sort of like a bit about me. In terms of what we're going to be covering in this webinar today, we're going to start by doing a quick intro to startups and Jumpstart. I'm aware a lot of you probably attended our webinar last year to know a bit more about this already, but in case you didn't, we're just going to quickly run through that. And then we're going to go into sort of how to write a top CV for startups, all of our top tips on how to structure it, format, what to include, and also some top tips on how to, I guess, like twist some of the experience that you have to make it sound more impressive to a startup. Then we're going to go into our interview top tips. We're going to go through what to typically expect in an interview for startups, because they tend to interview a little bit differently to different companies, and sort of our top tips of how to prepare and things like that. And then lastly, a Q&A to answer any of your questions that you have about startup applications, Jumpstart, startups more generally. Happy to answer any of your questions. I'd recommend to sort of keep firing them in the chat, because we can answer some as we go, but we'll leave like a bigger Q&A for the end if people have sort of more general questions. So yeah, that's a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today. So to start, what is Jumpstart? Basically, at Jumpstart, we exist to make startups a valuable career path for everyone. We do this by matching what we call great people with great startups. We have firstly run a graduate scheme for startup careers. Every month, we select and train recent grads, and we place them in London's most exciting tech startups. I guess one disclaimer here is that we say London's most exciting tech startups because the vast majority are based in London, but you don't have to be based in London or want to move to London to take part in the program. We do work with some startups outside of London, and also we offer a lot of remote opportunities if you don't want to be moving to London to get a startup job. Once you start working in your startup, you then join alongside a cohort of loads of other grads. Typically, it's about 30 to 40 other grads, and you'll receive ongoing career mentorship and support. You'll receive support from the other grads on the program, but also from our like sort of more senior mentors in the startup world. So to go into a little bit more detail about what to expect on the Jumpstart program, it's typically a 4-week program. On the first week of the program, we have what we call our startup spotlights. This is where we bring in about 40 plus different startup founders of some of the most exciting startups in the UK. And they pitch to you over Zoom, just like we are now, about basically why you should work for them, which I know can sound kind of wild, but genuinely they all come in with so much excitement and enthusiasm for Jumpstarters. They want to meet all the grads, and you get to ask them questions and kind of grill them about anything to do with their business, from the role to the company to their plans for the future. And it's a really exciting time to actually just sort of get to know the different opportunities out there in the startup world. Once you've heard from all of the startup founders, you get to choose your top 5 that you want to go straight to interview with. You will interview with your top 5 favorite startups, and we'll also give you training in the beginning of the second week on best interview practice and workplace skills. So actually, a lot of this presentation is kind of a sneak peek into a lot of the Jumpstart training. We're kind of giving away a bit of our product to you, even though you're not on the program, which is quite exciting. And so, yeah, we give some of our top tips, having overseen hundreds of startup interviews, because we sort of know how to like put your best foot forward in them. Once you've done your interview training, you then interview with the startups over a 2-week period. At the end of that 2-week period, you should hopefully secure at least one job offer from one of your startups. If you don't, we offer ongoing support to help you match you with the right startup of your choice. And then once you start your role, you'll receive ongoing support from us. Mentorship will match you with like a top mentor in the startup world. We'll give you ongoing training opportunities. We run rocket hour sessions and things like that. And we have a really active alumni community where we run socials throughout the year, from like I guess bowling. We're doing darts tomorrow with the alumni community, and also just regular drinks events with your cohort, so you get sort of know everyone else who's in the startup world. So yeah, that's a quick summary on how the Jumpstart program works. So now you know a bit more about Jumpstart, you might be thinking, what are startups? I think in the simplest terms, we would describe startups as early stage businesses in the tech sector. So these are often digitally based businesses that have only existed for maybe like 2 years, maybe a bit more. They're digitally based, so that means it just work mainly on the internet. They might be creating a product, but mainly they are completely digitally based. They're innovative. This is a really important one. We think what differentiates startups from corporates is that they're doing something completely different and something new and something exciting. They're VC funded. This means venture capital funded. So basically, venture capital firms are like banks, and they fund startups and they give them that money to help them become financially stable and to give them that potential to grow really, really fast over the next few years. And so, yeah, we think startups are a super exciting place to like space be working in, because they're so innovative, they're so fast growing, there's so much going on in this sector. We've got a little diagram on the board here just to show how much variety there can actually be in the startup world. So from Sunsave, which the solar panel startup that we work with that only has maybe 10 people on the team, to Vera Health, which is a femtech startup that we're working with. They work on sort of women's health and stuff like that, and they have about 60 members on the team. To Monzo, which I guess would no longer be counted as a startup, but it has a similar startup culture and was previously a startup and now has like hundreds of people on the team, and I'm sure you've all heard of it. So that just sort of shows like the growth rate that startups go through and the complete variety that you can come across in the sector, which is really exciting. But because startups are really diverse, innovative, fast-paced work environments, they're often structured a little bit differently to your typical corporate grad schemes or larger companies. And this means that their assessment processes are often structured a little bit differently too, which brings us to sort of the main content of this presentation. We're going to start by talking you through how to write a top CV for a startup, because in basically every single startup application that you'll come across, the first stage is submitting a CV to them. And startups are looking for quite particular things on CVs. So we're going to chat through structure, format, and how you can make your experience relevant and sort of the best possible structure for the startup environment. So first of all, it's important to go through what startups are actually looking for on your CV and in your application. Our first one, and the one that we've actually highlighted on the left here, which because we think it's by far the most important thing to have on your CV, is like a proactive mentality. So you want to be able to demonstrate that you're able to take a task and run with it and own it without very little guidance. Just sort of think about things that you've done in your life, which has just shown that you're able to like come up with new ideas, solve problems independently, and just be a really like proactive, impactful person. After that, we think structured thinking is a really good thing to demonstrate at any part in your startup application. Are you able to take a complex problem, break it down, apply an inquisitive mindset, come up with innovative solutions. That's like a really important part that startups are looking for. Are you hardworking? Are you willing to basically run through a brick wall? Not literally, of course, to see a task through. Can you demonstrate that on your CV, that you've done a job or you've had some experience in the past where you've shown you're super hardworking? And lastly, making an impact. Startups are all about being innovative and doing something different, and they're very mission-driven companies, and they care about making an impact. It's really important to have someone else on their team that cares as much about making a positive impact as they do. So if you can demonstrate all of these things in your startup application, you're already like halfway there. So we're going to take you through quickly our top tips on CV structure and format, because I think this is actually one like initial step that a lot of people get wrong, and it really can help just like to perfect this as well. So first of all, we'd recommend keeping your CV as simple and functional as possible. We've covered like sort of our top headlines here. So we recommend including your education, your employment and work experience, followed by extracurricular and voluntary experience, followed by any additional experience and qualifications that you have at the very end. And we'd say do it in that order, especially if it's a graduate CV. Keep your education at the top and then any relevant work experience and employment experience there. We recommend keeping your formatting clean and functional. Avoid bright colors or complicated graphics where necessary. We've seen quite a lot of CVs before where people just put these big complicated graphics in the middle, which sort of shows the spectrum of all their skills and stuff like that. And it's not really necessary. You can list your skills if you really want to include like a spectrum of all your skills on there, because it just takes up so much of your CV and distracts from the really important content about you. So I would just recommend keeping it as functional and clean as possible. And also save it in a PDF format to make it easier to share. And we've had quite a few like situations where people would submit like Word documents and things like that. What people don't realize is sometimes like the comments from their parents on Word documents can come up along the side, and we can see like basically the history of like edits and all the other people that have had input on their CVs. And it's not that it counts against you, but it can come across sometimes as a little unprofessional. So if you can just save it to PDF, it makes it easier for us to read, and also just sort of makes it look a bit more professional more generally. We then recommend just keeping your CV short. Your CV should be able to fit on one page. If your CV takes 2 pages, it's likely that you're not focusing on the key relevant information. And I know when I first graduated, I actually had a 2-page CV, and I do not know why, because I had less experience than I have now. And yet I managed to make it fill 2 pages. I think you can write as much waffle as you want on a CV if you want to, but basically keep it short and keep it functional. The startup founders, when they're reading your CV, they don't want to spend loads of time like sifting through all the information. Keep it to 1 page and only pick the relevant information to include on that. And this might seem like a bit of an obvious one, check for spelling and punctuation. It's something that people often miss if they don't do that last double check before submitting their CV. And it can be an immediate sort of red flag and make you look a bit unprofessional if you don't have if you have spelling mistakes throughout your CV and things like that. It's not necessarily like the biggest red flag ever, but yeah, it's just a matter of like being a bit more professional in your applications. So that's all on CV structure and format. Now a little bit on sort of what we would recommend you like include in your CV and the typical content you should cover. So first of all, keep your content relevant. Keep in mind what you want your interviewer to know. So we'd recommend looking at the job description. If it's for Jumpstart, look at sort of what we're looking for in our typical candidates and highlight anything that you think is relevant to this in bold on your CV. Anyone looking at your CV doesn't really want to spend more than a few minutes looking at it, ideally. And so if you can keep things in bold, it really helps them in case they like miss any valuable information. So yeah, keep it relevant and put things in bold where possible. What, not how. This is something that we really like emphasize to a lot of people. Focus on the tangible outcomes of anything that you've done on your CV and the role that you precisely played. We get a lot of people on their CV using quite passive language, sort of saying like, I was told to do this in my role, I had to do this and stuff like that. And that doesn't show any initiative, any like proactivity, any impact that you directly had. So when you include experience in your CV, think about exactly what you did in every scenario and demonstrate that. Show what you did on your CV. We would always recommend including numbers where possible on your CV to show exactly what you did. Linking back to the other one, a really great way to just show what you've done and your impact that you've made is through numbers, because it's just so clear immediately the impact that you've made. And so we've given a couple of examples here. You could say if you're working in hospitality, you made X amount in sales at a shop or something like that, or you increased attendance by X% to like an event. Maybe you're involved in student societies or something like that, and the event last year had poor attendance, this year had great attendance. If you can put that in like a numerical value on it, you're going a really long way, and it shows just how much impact you had. And lastly, show proactivity. Like we mentioned, this is the key like attribute to like cover in anything that you do. And we think a really great way to show proactivity is like demonstrating stuff outside your studies that you've done that just shows that you go above and beyond in different situations. So whether it's being involved in societies, maybe you've got your own side hustle, like along the side, a little shop or something like that, your own social media accounts that are really like popping off or something like that. Anything like that can really show your proactivity on a CV. And sometimes people think that like a social media account that's really popular can look a bit unprofessional, but we actually think in the startup world it's something that really makes you stand out, and especially people want like young people who are really social media savvy, so it's a really good thing to include on your CV where possible. So we thought that actually it might be helpful to just put into a few examples of how you can incorporate alternative work experience into your CV. So sometimes people don't really know how to write about societies and things like that. And like I mentioned before, startups are really interested in this like sort of unconventional work experience because it makes you show you're more interesting, but also it's a really great way to demonstrate proactivity and that you're hardworking. So we've got a couple of examples on the screen here. The first one being hospitality jobs. A lot of people when they're at uni, they work for like pubs and bars or cafes and things like that. And they think that that's not a really relevant experience, but it's kind of about how you frame it again. So we've given an example here that you can say you've worked X hours a week alongside my studies. And this immediately just shows that you're hardworking, especially if you got like a good grade in your degree at the end of the year or whatever. It shows that like you, alongside you working really hard in your degree, you were able to like work really hard in the job. And again, if you had any impact on the sales in the job or things like that, maybe if you incorporated new initiatives into the team, so like, I don't know, bring the team better and closer together and things like that, it's all really good stuff to bring in and just sort of show directly what you did in that role, and you get a long way. A lot of people that we get CVs from have often like don't have the time to do like other work experience, like working in hospitality or things like that, because they have caring or home responsibilities. This is like obviously like a personal thing if you choose to include it or not. But if people want to include it because they feel like they don't have other work experience that they want to include, a good way to frame it is sort of say that you're a caregiver for a friend or relative while completing university. And it's that line while completing university that just shows that you're a really hardworking, compassionate person, and that can really stand out in a startup CV. And lastly, a lot of people will be involved in student societies, and this is a really, really great thing to include on your CV where possible. So we would like one example we've got here is if you were an editor for a student magazine and you wrote 5 articles on XYZ, and that just shows that you're a really proactive person and you made an impact at uni. But again, you can apply this to any student society that you're involved in, as long as you can show what you did, particularly if you're in like a leadership position or something in a society. That is like very, very impressive to startups. So that's just like a taste of some of the examples that we have and some of our top tips on like CVs. I would actually really recommend checking out our CV template. There's a link to it on the website, but I've also included the link to the QR code here because it has a proper like CV structure that you're welcome to like go to file, make a copy to like edit it yourself and add in your own experience, because then you have a ready-made CV basically. But also it has more examples of how you can frame different types of experience in there. So I would really recommend checking that out. I'll leave it up on there screen for a little minute and maybe we'll pause to see if there's any CV related questions before I move on.
I'm just scanning the chat, Ellie, because there's been a lot of
Yeah. It's all right if there aren't any questions yet, because we can always answer more at the end.
Yeah, no, of course. Okay, so someone asked, how much work experience would you recommend putting on your CV?
I think include as much as you can, basically. Like sort of the more work experience, the better, because it shows like you've got like varied like background and stuff like that. If you have like tons and tons, include like your most recent roles, or if one of your most recent roles is a bit less relevant than one of the other ones, and pick that one over it. But it's better to have it in chronological order. So pick your most like your 3 most recent roles if that's all that you can fit, and then just like write about those in much detail as you can. But yeah, there's no real like set amount. It's kind of what you can fit onto what page that doesn't make you look like you're cramming too much in, basically.
And I'll just add to that as well, like just make sure that it's kind of relevant, and the transferable skills are like really explicit for the roles that you're applying for. Another question, this one's a funny one. What is the recommended font size?
I guess like that's just like it depends. I would say like don't go smaller than like size 10 on like a CV, because it's just like it gets a little bit ridiculous after that point and you have to zoom in to be able to read it. But yeah, I would say like don't go like that much smaller than size 10. But yeah, it can vary. Like depends what just looks reasonable when you've created your PDF document, really.
No, yeah, no, most definitely. I think sometimes I've been notorious to go like 9.5, just
No.
to do everything, just to fit everything. But no, I
Yeah,
agree,
yeah.
to be honest. It gets ridiculous after that. Someone asked regarding proactivity, i.e., working X amount of hours alongside studies, how would you advise demonstrating the ability to prioritize? So more
Oh,
niche,
interesting
like,
question.
study type of
I
one.
Yeah, I think you can literally just say that, like, you can give examples of how you like prioritize your time. You can just say, like, I wouldn't just say I prioritize my time to be able to work alongside my studies. You could say, like, I set amount this many hours to do this a day. I like sort of I created to-do lists in advance, so I knew like I covered X, Y, and Z. Obviously, you don't need to write more than a couple of lines, but yeah, if you can give like a quick example of how you prioritize your time, that is like a good thing to do. But yeah, I would just say like maybe using like organizational tools, if you can like name drop like an organizational tool that like loads of companies use. Like I don't know if anyone's heard of like Asana or Notion or something like that. That could
Mhm.
also like go a little way. But yeah, that's like quite a good thing to include as well.
Yeah, I would also say like a good example for that one is obviously in university you have multiple different courseworks that usually have like conflicting deadlines as well.
Hmm.
Being able to kind of like prioritize which one you should approach first is a skill in itself. So that's something that's worth highlighting. Someone
Hmm.
said, as a recent graduate, is it better to put my education after my work experience or before?
So for Jumpstart, if you're like graduating the last 0 to 2 years, we prefer you putting your education at the top, just so we can like immediately see it. It's not that we look too much into your degree or anything like that, but it is a requirement to enter Jumpstart that you have to have had a degree. So yeah, we'd recommend including that at the top so we don't miss it. But yeah, there's no real like set rule on it, but on our template, we recommend including it at the top, especially if you're a recent graduate.
Perfect. And then I'll just ask one last one and then we can kind of
Mhm.
progress and answer the questions later. Someone said, is this suitable for someone who isn't a recent grad and looking for a career switch?
So I think a lot of the suggestions that we have here and like the recommendations are like relevant to career switches as well. I get a lot of our advice is more tailored towards the graduate side of things, but definitely in terms of like the skills that startups look for, proactivity, being hardworking, structured thinking is still relevant to anyone who's looking to career switch as well. So I yeah, and also the next like interview top tips, they like startups replicate their interview style for junior and more senior people as well. So like what you expect an interview will be pretty much the same.
Perfect. And is the career switch program still available for people that are looking to get onto that as well at the
Yeah,
minute?
yeah. Yeah, for sure. We're currently, I can't remember when the next cohort for career switches is starting, but we are always accepting applications for the career switches. So if you just go to our website, and I'll link to our website at the end, you can access the page and find out when the next cohort's after that.
Perfect. Sounds good. Yeah, let's see if we can just move on.
Sure. Okay, so yeah, now we've covered like our top CV tips. You've submitted a great CV. The startup wants to interview you because they think you sound brilliant. We'll go through sort of how you can smash that interview. So what to expect and our top tips on how to stand out. But before we did that, I don't know how much what we're doing for time now, but I was going to include a bit on asking people what concerns them most about the interviews. But how are we doing for time, Stephen? Do we have time to include that?
Yeah, we have time. We have time. We have about like 2 minutes.
Okay.
But yeah, no, yeah. So if people can just drop in the chat, then what concerns them most about interviews, and let's give it 2 minutes, see what people come up with.
Yeah, brilliant. Because yeah, basically, I was curious to find out, see if we can sort of smash any people's expectations, demystify some things, make people feel a bit more reassured about any concerns they have.
Yeah, most definitely. Someone said mostly the interviewer, and yeah, this is a very good one. And I think when I kind of changed my thought process of like the interviewer is just like a normal person that I'm going to be working with, it's less
Hmm.
daunting. I appreciate when you're going for like typical corporate jobs with like a panel of three interviewers. Sometimes it's very, very difficult, and you kind of feel like they're against you. But honestly, they're just a normal person. I don't know. What's your views on that, Eddie?
Yeah, I mean, I used to conduct all the interviews for the Jumpstart program. So I've interviewed about like 150 plus people. And I think definitely from my experience, the interviewer is always on your side. They want you to do well. And I always want to like try and support you and get the most out of your answers as possible. We're not ever trying to catch you out or anything like that. So yeah, I think especially in startups, we all want you to do well and we want to find like your potential. And we don't really care about making you feel like intimidated and you having to be like all corporate and stuffy and giving all the right answers. So yeah, I'd say the interviewers aren't the people to be like scared of in startups.
Someone said structuring answers, which I'm sure we're going to go into in the next section. Another person said not knowing how to approach a question or question that catches me off guard, which is kind of in the same light.
Yeah.
I'm trying to look for unique ones. Interesting. Company culture that just isn't budding. Not sure
Interesting.
how you would interpret that one. How's the culture at startups, Eddie?
Well, it varies startup to startup, but company culture is just like such an important thing at startups. And I think it's something I'm going to touch on in like my next like sort of few slides. But yeah, like I think it's a way more important thing at corporates than at startups and at corporates and stuff like that. Startups each have their own like individual company culture, things that they're all like passionate about. And it's such small teams that you want to make sure people gel. And so actually I'd say that like interviews are as much for you as they are for like the startups themselves. You want to like make sure that it's a right fit for you. And a big part of Jumpstart, what we do is making sure that the culture fit is there and that the job and role fit is there as well.
No, most definitely. And then this one I found really interesting as well before we move on, when they ask for salary expectations.
Interesting. So at Jumpstart, that won't be like a problem at all, just because before you go and choose to interview it like at startups, they give their set salary and you can like we give you all the skills that you need to like negotiate it all in advance before interviewing. So that would never be a problem. It would never happen in an interview that they ask for it. But we do have actually lots of like our interview like top tips and documents and ways to answer quite like unusual questions. And I think that we have an answer to that on like our program in like our sort of interview like handbook that we give to everyone on the program. But yeah, it's a tricky one and they shouldn't really be asking it. But I would say in most startups, they don't do it. Not until like the very end, once they give you the job offer.
Yeah, so I just saw one more interesting one, sorry, before we move on. This person said, do you think it's bad to say, I'm not sure how to answer that question in an interview?
I think you can say that, but don't just leave it at that and just leave like dead air in the air. I would say like say, oh, I'm not quite sure how to answer that. Would you mind rephrasing the question? Or what exactly do you mean by like this word in the question? Do something like that because it actually shows then you're listening and that you weren't just like zoning out when they asked the question and just like leaving awkwardness in the air. I would say try and like get them to explain the question as much as possible because like I said, the interviewer is on your side and they want you to be able to answer questions that they give you. And if you're like really, really stuck, just be like, oh, can we like, oh, I'm actually still not sure. Can we move on from that? And then just like try your best to outperform in all the other questions.
No, perfect. Okay, back to Yeli.
Nice. Okay. So yeah, like I said, I hope that we can reassure you about a few things in startup interviews and demystify and answer some of your questions. So let's go. So typically in startups, our experience of overseeing hundreds of startup interviews when all of our grads go through the program, we sort of have seen that there are 3 typical interview stages that they go through. This does vary a little bit startup to startup. Likely you'll experience some combination of the stages above, whether they mix them together, whether they like stretch them out across like 4 stages instead. But anyway, the first one being the getting to know you interview. This is an interview which is basically, it's just doing a really basic role like fit. Basically, they want to know your motivations for the role, whether you're a good fit for the role, and just like why you're excited and passionate about this company. This sort of interview, you'll typically see questions like, tell me about yourself, and you just have to give like a summary about yourself. Or they'll say, tell me about a time when, and you have to give an example of when you've done like a particular thing. They might ask you what excites you most about this role, what scares you most about this role. And all this stuff is just really important, just like to be quite honest about it, because they want to just know that you're a good fit from the like get-go so they can sort of sift through different applicants. And so yeah, the typical first stage of any startup interview process is just a getting to know you stage. After that, you typically have a case study interview. This might not be anything that any of you have come across before. I'd never come across it before. I'd actually started working in startups. But typically startups, because again, like they're small teams, they want to make sure that they're hiring the right person. They give you a work sample to take away, often spend like 1 to 2 hours on. And this will be like a type of work that will replicate the sort of work that you would be doing in the actual role. Often it's like you've been set this task to achieve this in 1 week. How would you do it? You present like your thoughts on that. And you normally come into the interview, you give the presentation, and then the interviewer will ask you some questions about it. And all of this is just in place to test your suitability for the role and also your passion for it. So like, did you put a ton of effort into it? That shows you're super passionate about the case study and about the role itself. And then after that, you typically have a meet the team interview. This is like the last stage after you've met maybe like one person on the team who's done the first 2 interviews. You come into the office sometimes, or you go on like a big Zoom call with everyone and you just like chat to other people on the team. And this is like what I was mentioning earlier, all about culture fit. They want to make sure that you would gel with the rest of the team, that you would work well with them. They think you'd be a good addition to the team. And this is one that people find like super, super intimidating because it's like, how do I come across well? But we'd always recommend just like trying to be yourself as much as possible and just letting your personality shine in like the meet the team culture fit interviews. So there are sort of a lot of different things that you can do to prepare for startup interviews. We've sort of split our top tips into what you can do beforehand to get ready for them and what you can do during the interview to make sure that you shine. So our first thing that we'd recommend is practicing your elevator pitch. This is the phrase that we use for just basically how to answer that tell me about yourself question at the start of an interview. And I actually can't believe it, but when I first started interviewing for companies and just like jobs more generally when I first graduated, I did not think the tell me about yourself interview question was an actual like part of the interview. I literally just thought they were just being like, oh, just like breaking the ice, tell me a little bit about yourself. And so I never prepared an answer to that question. And now I realize it's actually so important to have a really good answer to the tell me about yourself question, because it shows just how you can shine in those first few seconds of the interview, how you can really make yourself stand out and make a positive first impression just from the get-go. So we would recommend keeping it to a minute, your answer to that question, and prepare this in advance, summarizing your background, your interests and motivations leading up towards this very interview. So sort of think about what particular bits in your like background, your interests, your experience, your motivations that have meant that you've finally arrived at this very interview and what makes you now the perfect fit for this role. We don't want to make it sound like too rehearsed, but it's good to prepare few bullet points you want to make sure you cover, practice it a little bit in your spare time. So then when you get into the interview, you feel really comfortable just like talking about it as if it's like coming really naturally to you. After that, I'd recommend thinking about your motivations for the role. This is a really important thing. You want to work out why this role and also why this company excites you. A lot of people will sort of only think about one or the other in terms of role or company, but startups really want you to care about both. They want to know that you've looked through the job description, picked out the bits that really excite you in that job. You've researched the company and you know what bit about their mission or their plans for the future really excites you, and like talk about them in the interview as much as possible. Even if like they don't ask a question about it, try and fit it in and just show like you've done your research and you like are super passionate, because just showing your motivations and your passion for the role goes a really long way. I'd recommend this particularly for the case study style interview, but don't worry about being right. Or like, as also just if they ask you sort of a hypothetical question in an interview and you're worried that you're sort of being caught off guard, don't worry about being right. Focus on having a clear and logical answer to this rather than looking for a correct answer. So if you're in your case study, you're sort of obsessing over, I think I've gone down the wrong route. Make sure you're just showing your thought process behind the answer that you've gone for in your case study. Show that you sort of, oh, I started with this question. I thought a really good route to go down could be this or this. I chose this for this reason. So therefore, I'm doing a presentation on this. That sort of like thought process shows that you have the structured thinking that startups look for, that you're able to break down problems and be like clear and logical in your answer. And that can go way further than necessarily having the perfect answer to every question. And lastly, I'd say prepare questions for the interviewer as well and beforehand. I think a lot of people come with really generic questions to interviews. There's stuff like, why do you love working there? And what's your favorite thing about the company? And those are like nice questions to ask, and the interviewer always likes answering them, but they don't make you stand out in an interview. We'd recommend doing some like additional research on the role and company and ask questions that really show your interest and show that you've gone above and beyond in preparing for this interview. Some typical questions that we see people ask that really makes them stand out are ones like, maybe you've researched the company and you see there are like 4 competitors that are in the same space, and they're like, and you are curious to see what the company is doing differently to stand out from those competitors. That's a completely valid question that you can ask. You can say, I saw this company is doing this. What are you doing to make sure that you sort of can keep up against them? And it's something that people in the company really love answering, because it's something that's front of mind for them, something that they're currently working on. And it shows that you actually are interested in the business and interested in what they're doing at the moment. Don't ask anything that you think would like catch them out. Say like, I've done all this research, your finances look terrible, or anything like that. But just ask questions that show you've done like a little bit of research to show that you're interested in the company. You sort of want to ask like slightly more challenging, interesting questions about them. So yeah, these are our top tips on how to prepare before the interview. There are obviously more things that you can be doing above this, but I'd recommend elevator pitch, focusing on your motivations, focusing on having clear and logical answers, and preparing questions in advance for the interviewer. So now you're prepared for before the interview, you're in the interview, what can you be doing to make sure that you sort of stand out and you are successful in it? First of all, we'd say, let your personality shine. Startups aren't looking for robots and people who have like the perfect answers all the time. You want to make sure that your answers are reflective of you and not just what sounds good to say and like what just like doesn't, just sounds the most professional. Try and like give answers that are really like reflective of yourself. Try and add in your passion where possible and just sort of show a bit more about you, because you want to make sure that the startup is a good fit for you as it is for like them. And so, yeah, if you are sort of true to yourself in the interview, then that goes a long way in just showing that it's a perfect fit both ways. After that, I'd say show, don't tell. This goes back to what we were saying in like the CVs and like giving examples and demonstrations of what you exactly do. Do this again in interviews. Give tangible examples when you're describing your interests and when you're describing your experiences to make sure you stand out and to actually show that you have like the credibility to be good in this role. So for example, if you're interviewing for a sustainability startup, you could say, oh, I'm super interested in sustainability. That's why I want to interview here. But that's quite a generic answer. Anyone could say that. Say, I'm super interested in sustainability because when I was at uni, I studied this module that really excited me. Or when I was at uni, I volunteered for this like climate initiative, or I started a blog where I started writing articles about like climate change, stuff like that. The same with experiences. You can say like, oh, I have experience in like social media, but don't just say that. Give an example of your experience in social media and why you're really, really passionate about social media, what you love most about it. That sort of stuff just really like makes you stand out, and just like this is like moving beyond the generic and showing exactly why you are perfect for this role, and not just like, don't let just your experiences speak for themselves, basically. And lastly, I'd say be comfortable. Startups are a bit different to corporates, that we don't care about people having the most professional backgrounds or like everything going perfect in a CV, or you make it like, we want you to like make jokes and have fun in like an interview and things like that. And so I'd say just like, if it's a virtual CV, take the interview in a familiar environment that you're comfortable in. Like, just like I would take my CVs like in my bedroom, like at my desk and things like that. And I think that's completely fine. You don't need to have a perfect background or anything like that. And the same in startups. In the offices, we don't typically wear suits. And so it would be quite strange and actually would make you stand out in maybe a negative way if you turned up to a startup interview in a suit. So we'd recommend wearing something comfortable and work appropriate. A lot of people in startups do wear hoodies, but maybe hoodies aren't like the ideal thing to wear to a startup interview. But so I'd recommend just wearing something like a t-shirt and jeans, or just like your favorite shirt or something like that. Just like something that's like professional and comfortable for you. Just basically, you just want to feel like at ease in the interview, and you don't want to be there to be any distractions from just yourself. So yeah, let your personality shine, show, don't tell in all of your answers, and be comfortable where possible. And those are like sort of all of our top tips on how to interview. Like I mentioned on the program, we have a lot more sort of our interview handbook, how to answer questions in a little bit more detail. But yeah, that would cover most of our top tips on how to interview at startups. So any questions?
Thank you so much, Ellie. That was brilliant. And yeah, we can kind of go through some of the questions that people had as well earlier. So someone said, how do you kind of avoid waffling when you're in an interview?
I think it is a hard one, because I definitely can be a bit of a waffler in interviews. I've noticed it myself. I think it's often when you have a good idea of the type of questions that they're going to ask you, and you know sort of the type of answer that you're going to give to them, that is like a really good way to like avoid waffling. So if you look through the job description and you see sort of like 5 key skills that they're asking for in the job description, it's likely they're going to ask about those in the interview. Before the interview, then prep like 3 bullet points that you'll use to answer that question. Practice a little bit saying it to yourself, but again, don't practice it to the point that you sound robotic, but just practice saying it a little bit out loud. Know how you're sort of going to end that like answer to the question, and that's a really good way to sort of keep you concise and keep you on point. I'd recommend not having like a ton of notes in front of you, because then it's really obvious to the interviewer that you're going like this the whole time and looking at your notes. But yeah, I'd say like practice a little bit in advance to sort of have a couple like bullet points in your mind that you're going to say. Don't do everything off the cuff, basically.
Noted. Someone said, should you add a personal profile to your CV, or will that take up unnecessary space?
You can do it. I'd say it's something maybe that you for Jumpstart itself, we don't really need it because all of our roles are really generalist. So it's not something that makes you stand out to have like a little bio at the top of your CV or anything like that. A lot of startups, if it's like a really specific role and you really want to just like make yourself shine, when you then apply to the startup, you can put like 1 to 2 lines, but it's not like necessary. I think if you sort of follow the other top tips that we have in terms of like using bold and like highlighting the relevant experience, and that will take you most of the way there, and you don't always need like a personal profile at the start.
Noted. Should you have a picture of yourself on your CV?
That's like up to personal preference. We generally sort of, I think it can make you like stand out and make you be remembered, but it also takes up a lot of unnecessary space. So I'd say like if you really, really want a picture on your CV, make sure you prioritize first that it's a 1 page and then like add a picture. But it's completely personal preference. I don't really often see why you would include a picture on your CV, just because like I don't think someone should hire you based on how you look. So that's just basically why you shouldn't include a picture on your CV from like up my perspective, but like also complete personal preference. Anyone can add a picture on their CV if they want to.
Noted. Someone said, "Hi, Ellie. Are there any biotech, healthcare, and pharma startups within the companies that Jumpstart work with?"
Yeah, for sure. We definitely work with a lot of like health tech startups, and underneath that obviously comes like biotech and farm tech and stuff like that. Every single cohort we have like new health tech startups that join, and we also have some like recurring ones as well. So at the beginning of the presentation, I touched on one which was Vera Health, which is like a women's health startup, and they're doing stuff to sort of spread more of the word about like menopause care and things like that. But we work with a lot of startups that just sort of making healthcare more accessible in different ways, or sort of doing like more research about healthcare and stuff like that. It varies from like cohort to cohort, but like, yeah, I can promise that we do have a lot. And if you look on our website, you can find some examples of them.
Noted. Someone said, "Are there any junior research roles available, or is that something you've kind of placed for before when you're working with startups?"
It's not a super common role. We have that generally they tend to be a bit more generalist than that on like the program. So typically the roles that people go in are like founder associate roles, where you can involve some research in that, but that is like the role sort of encompasses a bunch of different things in the company, from strategy to marketing to sales to like analysis and things like that. It sort of encompasses a lot of different stuff. So research comes under that, but typically we don't have that many just pure research based roles.
Noted. Another question. Some of them are quite similar, so I'm trying to group them.
Mhm.
Are the startups you work with open to considering hiring international students?
So yes, but with a disclaimer that we actually only accept people on the program currently if you're eligible for the 2-year post-study work visa. That's because we sort of can't guarantee that our startups offer sponsorship, so we don't want to accept anyone onto the program who then can't like get sponsored by a startup. So yeah, you can like apply for the program if you're eligible for the 2-year post-study work visa, and then the startups often will offer sponsorship, but it's something that we can't guarantee. Though we're hoping in the future it's something that we can actually like work on incorporating like more consistently into our program.
What sort of grad opportunities are offered at Jumpstart, just in terms of the kind of roles?
Sure. Yeah. So I touched on one quickly, which is the founder associate role. That's a really, really common role that grads go into, one of our most common ones, where you work directly with the founder on all areas of the business, from strategy to comms to marketing to any sales to anything under the sun, really, and just sort of helping with the inner workings of the business. So that's like a really, really common one. After that, we often do a lot of marketing based roles. And so that's all about sort of getting the word out about your company in different inventive ways. It can involve a bit of social media, but it can involve a lot of digital marketing campaigns and search engine optimization and things like that. We also have operations roles, which is a really common role that our grads go into as well, which is about all helping the inner workings of the business. So sort of optimizing different things and sort of making everything run smoothly where possible. And then also analysis roles as well. So you might become like a data analyst or like a business analyst or something like that in the company as well. That's a slightly less common role, but yeah, those 4 tend to be like our most common roles. We also actually have recently launched a sales stream as well, which is going to be a separate one to our generalist stream. And so that one is available for people who are really excited about communication and relationship building. But that's a completely separate stream to our normal graduate scheme. But yeah, you're still eligible to apply for it if you're a recent graduate.
Yep, yep. I was just gonna mention that as well because we do have a lot of career switches and like tech sales enthusiasts as well that are kind of looking to get into the tech world as well. So I was gonna kind of mention that as well.
Yeah.
What are the earning potentials and starting salary of the startups within tech?
So for our graduate roles, the starting salary tends to range between 30 to 40K a year, plus equity options on top. And so typically when you join a startup, you'll get a percentage of the business. Sometimes they give it to you sort of as pure like a bonus in the year, but often it's like sort of it's a percentage of the business that if the business gets like valued or sold, that you will get some money for it as well. And lots of grads get very excited by the equity options because obviously if your startup becomes like the next like Facebook or something like that, you would get a ton of money on top of your typical salary. And I'd say that like salary progression is really quick in startups as well. So you might start in 35, but within like 6 months, you generally will get a pay rise. So it's pretty quick when it comes in the startup world. And for career switches as well, the salary tends to like range a little bit more depending on your experience and what the startup can afford. But it typically ranges between about 60 to 80K a year for career switches. And that's people with 3+ years experiences, but typically about 5 years experience.
Noted, noted. Thank you for that. Do you have advice for someone trying to switch career from a science degree to tech?
So from a science degree, as if they've recently graduated,
Yeah.
or have they
So like,
been like,
yeah, so they're like a STEM graduate basically, and now they're kind of
yeah.
looking to like really delve into the world of tech. So maybe they were studying chemistry or something, for example, which was on that pharmaceutical kind of path, but now they're looking
Mhm.
to go into like conventional tech.
I'd say most startups are degree agnostic. They don't really care what your like degree background is. Obviously, they love it if someone has like a perfectly like startup-y background, and obviously that will make you stand out. But I have like a background in like geography. We have people backgrounds in history. We have people backgrounds in like chemistry and science and things like that who go through the program or who work in startups, and they don't really care so much. I would say if you feel like you have nothing relevant to put on your CV because you've sort of been focused purely on like a scientific route, I'd say look at some like online courses, start sort of doing your own research, see if you can maybe like get a bit of like work experience or something like that, or just like do a ton of research about startups. And I think that they'll probably have experience that you don't realize that you have that you can twist into something that makes you sound sort of proactive and interested in startups. And that will take you a long way, I'd say. But yeah, degrees don't really matter in the startup world.
Noted. Someone said, how do you tackle finding a graduate job as someone that doesn't have much tech experience? So, if you don't know, the whole idea of the Jumpstart program is the fact that you don't actually need experience and you can be a recent graduate and basically hop onto their program and be trained for a 4 week virtual program. And then, be introduced to a bunch of startups basically that you're interested in. So, that's the beauty of it. You don't need any experience at all. Anything you want to add to that, Eddie?
Yeah, no, exactly. I didn't have any tech experience before I ended up working for a startup. I literally just had like charity experience and like volunteering and stuff like that. And I still got a role in the startup. And most people I know didn't have tech experience before like their first big tech job. So yeah, I would say it's not necessary at all. And we help you get a long way without having the experience at Jumpstart.
Perfect. Someone said, I've submitted an application. Roughly how long would it take for my application to be reviewed?
So it depends on what cohort you've submitted your application for. We review the applications on a rolling basis, but typically cohort by cohort. And as I said, they run monthly. So generally, you should expect to hear within at the latest 3 weeks before your cohort start date. But if you apply quite last minute for like the cohort that's coming up, you should sort of expect to hear in the next like few days or the next week or so. But yeah, if you apply in advance, about 3 weeks before your cohort start date is the latest you should expect to hear.
Perfect. And yeah, just scanning through a lot of the questions, you've kind of answered them as well. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it, to be honest. I think this was a really good one, a lot of engagement, and it seems like a lot of
Nice.
people really valued this session as well. So much appreciated, and thank you for your time, Ellie. Um,
Perfect. Just one quick thing. We've also, alongside our sales cohort, we've launched a student community recently for anyone who's sort of excited and interested in startups and Jumpstart, but hasn't graduated yet and can't apply. And I've included a QR code here that you can scan, which takes you to our form where you can apply to join the community. We will accept anyone who applies, but we're actually just building it at the moment, and it's literally been launched this week, and we want as many students to join it. We're going to be sharing like opportunities, different like events like this, but specifically for students. We're going to share just like, yeah, different events, different news in the startup world, things like that. And I'd really recommend joining it because you can sort of start to form your own little startup-y network before you even graduate. So yeah, if there are any students here, please scan the code and join the community. And also
Nice.
all of my contact details are here and the website there and our socials and everything. So if you want to follow us on any of those or like get in touch after with any more questions, please do.
Nice, nice, guys. This recording is also going to be live on our website as well, and there'll be links to this slide, so you can literally have all the contact details and stuff like that. Just a few more questions have kind of creeped in. So which job option would I select if I'm interested in a data analyst role?
So when you apply for the program, you can select from like a list of job options that you're most interested in. That doesn't actually have like too much of an outcome on your application. You can select date, like I think one of the options when you apply is like business analyst or something like that. So I'd recommend selecting that. And then when you get on the program, tell us about your preferences. And then we will sort of try and help you find the best match in our startup, like lineup basically.
Noted. Someone said, do you have to graduate or be in third year? I don't know if they're referring to the community program, the ambassador program, or if they're just referring to being on the Jumpstart program. So maybe if you could just clarify both.
Yeah, sure. So to join our student community, yeah, you have to be like at university to do it. You can be in third year to join the community, but you can also be in like any year at uni to do that. To apply for the program, you can't take part in the program if you're currently still at uni. You have to have graduated or like be literally just about to graduate and just about to finish, because the startups often the roles start within a month of you joining the cohort, so you need to be able to start immediately. But you can apply in advance, and we have like you can apply for cohorts up until I think halfway through next year or something at the moment. So yeah, you can apply really far in advance if you want to. Though we would recommend applying a little bit closer to in time to it, because you might build more experience and more stuff that will make you stand out. So you want to give yourself the best chance possible to be successful.
Perfect. Just a couple more. What percentage of people that do the program actually end up getting jobs in startups?
So it's a pretty high percentage. It's like hard, like slightly hard for us to be like completely accurate on it, just because in the actual 4 week period, we'd say about like 70% of people end up getting roles through that just initial interview period. But then after that, we invite a lot of people back to join like another cohort after that if they didn't get roles. We often have like send through ad hoc opportunities and things like that. And then that percentage climbs and climbs. But like, yeah, in the initial like cohort period, when you first join and when you first interview the startups, about 70% of people will get roles that first time round, but then you have more opportunities.
Noted. Is it important to build your LinkedIn profile before applying?
It's not something that we typically look at. If you like include, if I would say focus more on the CV than on the LinkedIn profile. But when you are on the Jumpstart program itself, it's actually quite good to have a good LinkedIn profile. One of our top tips is after a startup is pitched to you, if it's one that particularly excites you, to add them on LinkedIn and tell them that you really enjoy their presentation. So then it might be good to have like quite a good LinkedIn profile so they remember you. But for the initial Jumpstart application, it's not necessary.
Perfect. And then last one, are grades very important for startups?
For startups, not so much. I'd say for Jumpstart, we do have a minimum grade requirement of a 2-1, though we actually are happy to often take it on a case by case basis. So if you sort of you just missed the 2-1 or something like that, you feel like you have a ton of relevant experience, you can reach out to us, and we're actually happy to consider your application anyway. But we would recommend reaching out to the general queries applications email there, because often our CV screeners you might slip through the cracks if you have like good experience, but you don't meet our initial grade requirements. But yeah, normally it's like a 2-1 minimum, but other than that, startups don't pick someone who's got a first over someone who's got a 2-1 or anything like that.
Perfect. No, thank you so much, Ellie, for this. Much appreciated.
No worries.
As mentioned, guys, if you can kind of, shout on socials about this, talk about the webinar, how you valued it, your key learnings and takeaways. And even if you're not interested in the program, there might be someone within your network or connections that would benefit from it as well. So it's important to kind of just do that and spread the good word. And then one more question. When would I expect to hear back after applying for the February cohort?
You should expect the latest to hear back 2 to 3 weeks before the February cohort start date. You'll have the start date on like the application that you sent off. But yeah, you should expect to hear like within like the next few weeks, basically.
Okay, then perfect.